So I don't see gig work becoming a real thing within the contact center environment. If anything, I think the robots will take away the transactional low end work as the robots and the chatbots get better and the voice bots get better, as self-serve capabilities get better. All the things that perhaps the gig workers would do can mostly be automated. So that then leaves the humans to do the things that the robots can't do, which tends to be the more complex work, the more emotional work, the more challenging work. And that then in turn, that's why I had this thesis about the progression of the contact center career, and why it's really important for contact centers to become careers and for contact centers to offer their people proper career pathways and career progressions. Because more and more, we're asking more of the people that work for contact centers. It's not something that you can do just sort of coming, you can't just parachute into an organization, because more and more, the humans in the contact center are dealing with those queries that you need training, you need expertise, you need knowledge of the organization, you need to know who to talk to internally to help get the answer to the question. You need emotional
Yeah.
intelligence as well. You need empathy for the customer. You need not just hard skills, i.e. product knowledge, organizational knowledge. You need soft skills. You need people skills.
I think that's going to be one of the most exciting trends is, I really think about it like a new economy. Like there's just a whole new tier of the economy that's about to boom, that is booming, that started booming during COVID. And, that is the like economy. What happens when the way that you interact with a company, the way you buy products and services, the way you get your questions answered, the way you get them maintained and installed, are through contact center actions and digital interactions. And I think that we're going to see that, folks are going to realize that the folks in the contact center, and they're starting to feel this way, are the business's lifeline to the market. Whereas previously, that was like almost the place that you had to route customers when things weren't working. But now it's like the lifeline. I think that it's the appreciation for what the contact center space is doing. Honestly, I think just like skyrocketed in 2020.
I agree wholeheartedly, and it's backed up by the work that we've done at the CCMA and the conversations we've had at the CCMA, further accelerated through COVID. And as other ways of interacting with organizations have become more constrained, the contact center has risen to the front and center and has become the front line of the organization. And contact centers they're not just doing downstream customer service, post-purchase types of journeys anymore. Contact centers are more and more involved in sales. They're more and more involved in marketing. They're more and more involved in strategic functions of the organization. But I just wanted to come back to remote working, which I'd be glad to talk more about, because I'm fascinated by the whole idea of sort of the new way of working. I think a gig economy can mean different things. What I don't think is going to happen is that sort of gig economy definition of like a temporary sort of part-time
Mm-hmm.
transactional type of worker, the sort of the low skilled worker who sort of is just there to, as a warm body in a seat. I don't think that's the sort of thing that's going to take root in contact centers. What I do think is interesting, and it's also visible, and it's going to be more of a thing in the wider working environment, both outside as well as inside contact centers, is a couple of things. This ability to time shift and place shift. Now, contact centers, maybe not so much time shifting, but already, having said that, what we are seeing is that flexible hybrid remote working is actually in some ways making it easier to fill shifts. So historically, at least in the UK, the 6 to 10 p.m. shift was always, the one that everyone wanted to avoid. Everyone hates the
Mm-hmm.
6 to 10 p.m. shift. But now, if you're working from home, you don't have a commute to worry about. And if you're a parent, 6 to 10 p.m. makes a lot of sense, because you can look after your kids, you can settle the kids down, and then do a shift in the evening when they're settled down or even in bed. That makes an awful lot of sense. And that is what we're hearing is that the graveyard shift, the evening shift, is becoming much easier to resource now. That's one example. The place shifting is fascinating to me. The idea of how offices are not just now places to work, but places to socialize, places to collaborate. And that's obviously not just restricted to contact centers, but it is very much a reality, I think, in contact centers, where a lot of the day-to-day work now doesn't have to happen in the office. But
Mm-hmm.
the office still has, and in some ways actually has a more focused purpose now. The office is going to be a place where you interact with people, your colleagues, other team members in and out of the contact center, where you share ideas. You might want to spend 2 days in the office or 3 days in the office and the other 2 or 3 days at home.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really interesting. Something else which we're starting to explore, which I think it's not here yet, and it remains to be seen how much it will establish itself within the contact center industry. But this idea of actually working from, not from home and not from the office, but from co-working spaces, from coffee shops, that is just not a thing in contact centers. And I think if you do a lot of telephony based work, if you do a lot of voice based work, if you deal with a lot of sensitive customer data, that's obviously going to be quite challenging to do from a WeWork or from a coffee shop. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing mostly email, if you're doing mostly text-based digital channels, there's no reason why you couldn't do it from a third space. That's interesting. I think that's a frontier. And this idea of, the idea of the road warrior, which is a segment that exists in a lot of sectors and a lot of industries, the roving salesperson is a classic example of that. The person who carries all of their equipment in their bag and spends a lot of time traveling. That could be a reality in the contact center. Somebody who isn't tied to a place and doesn't rely on having the equipment in a fixed location. They bring their equipment with them and they work where they please. That's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting. That's really interesting.
The technology is totally there. The technology is there. The cultural norms, at least at this moment, are there. I did a podcast with one of our guests a few months ago, and he recorded the podcast. He was taking it from the beach. He
Oh
spun
yeah,
his camera around and
no,
said, "Look, there's the waves, there's the sand." He took it from the beach.
no
Um,
doubt.
Stephen, have you heard of Crisp.ai, the company Crisp?
I haven't.
Cool. It's one of the cooler technologies I've seen, and it's like real true noise canceling, like filtering out background
Wow.
noise.
Wow.
And the way that they demo is, they put their money where their mouth is. They'll be sitting there tapping on the computer and making
Yeah.
noise, and then they turn on Crisp and you can't hear anything. That makes the coffee shop possible.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I have to look into that. Is that C? Is that C or K? Crisp.
It's with a K.
It's with a K. Okay, I'm gonna have to look into them. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, personally, I aspire to that. I see myself, as soon as travel becomes a possibility again, I see myself. I've always traveled a lot, as you can see
Yeah.
from my background. It's kind of built into my personal DNA. I see myself, and I'm lucky as well. Personally, I've sort of worked quite hard for it as well to get myself in a position where I can potentially work from wherever. I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
be physically in a place to do my job. And yeah, I can see myself working from the beach or from the other side of the world. There's nothing that stops me from doing that, and I think that's going to become more and more a reality for people. They will be able to be nomadic. This idea of a digital nomad is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
People who have laptop based jobs, who can, obviously it doesn't apply to everybody, but there are increasingly whole classes of jobs where you can do that sort of work, regardless of your physical location.
Yeah.
And it kind of blows my mind, actually, the possibilities, if you think about what that means for individuals and also what it means for employers.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny because right up until COVID, I think that the idea of the digital nomad had been starting to get bad press and have this like a little bit of like this cloud around it where people were saying, oh, those are the people who don't work well on a team, don't give a crap about looking involved and being physically connected. Those are the shoot, what's the term that they use in sales? Those are the lone wolves. Your digital nomads are the lone wolves. And then COVID hit, and I personally know two different people that traveled the country working out of a van. So I think that lifestyle, which I think was inevitable in some point, gaining traction as we have more tools and have more
Yeah.
freedom in where we work. But I think COVID took it from a little bit disillusioned and people kind of skeptical and wary to something that people aspire to, and they say, good on you, you're living out your
Yes.
dreams. That's awesome.
Yes. Yes. One of the positive side effects of COVID has been the redefinition of certain norms, has been the busting of certain myths, and no more is that evident than the world of work and the world of the workplace. Um, without COVID, I don't think COVID. I think it's been done to death now. It's been said over and over again how much the pandemic has accelerated certain things. It's accelerated transformation, digital transformation. It's accelerated change, but no more. Nowhere is that more evident than in attitudes, I think, towards remote working, home
Mm-hmm.
working. And I do think, for all the damage and the pain that COVID has wrought, this will be one of the lasting positive effects. It's that it's made home working a reality and a viable reality for many individuals and many organizations. That would have taken 20, 30 years to achieve had it not
Mm-hmm.
been for COVID. It doesn't
Yeah.
suit everybody. It doesn't suit everybody. It seems to me that home working versus office working, it's just, in some ways it's become like the latest culture war. you know it's like,
Mm-hmm.
are you for or are you against? And and like so many things, like almost everything, it depends. It works for some organizations, it doesn't work for others. It works for some individuals, it doesn't work for others. But the fact that it's now an option and we're talking about it, is fantastic. It's fantastic. And it's not it is very much the hot topic within contact centers. I don't think the idea of working from the beach or from coffee shops is yet a topic. I think it will become a topic, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly pre-COVID, and that was only a year ago or a year and a bit ago, the whole idea of working remotely in contact centers was, for most contact centers, pretty much unheard of. And
Yeah.
now it's the permanent reality.
When you talked about, it being a reality, or it might have taken 20 or 30 years, um, I think that there's a lot of truth to that, because I think that what we would have seen is almost like a trickle down effect where the most white collar workers with the highest paying jobs and the most options, those are the ones that get to work remote. And then it kind of filters and filters and filters. And we did see, unfortunately, some effect there in COVID. And that was definitely something that I think it shook our cultures and made us evaluate how are we treating everybody in the world,
Yeah,
and are we providing appropriate levels of fairness, because we know we're not. We need to
yeah.
get better. But I also really do appreciate that the contact center world, for the most part, did go remote, and that's
Mm.
millions of folks who are earning decent incomes, in a lot of cases, in some cases, great incomes, but certainly not the Silicon Valley engineers. And those folks got the freedom of the best lifestyle for them too, and that's a really special thing.
Yes. One of the things we talked a lot about, this time last year, was this idea of agility, and how people surprised themselves. People in contact centers amazed themselves, actually, how they were able to quite quickly pivot to remote working, to kit out all of their teams, their colleagues, to be able to, much quicker than they might have anticipated, to
Days,
maintain business continuity. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Seriously, days. They did it in days.
days.
A few organizations had anticipated it, starting putting plans in place. A few really forward-looking organizations already had remote working policies, but the majority of them, at least in the UK, hadn't planned and were forced into it. And you know what? You can do amazing things when you don't have a choice. And in
Mm-hmm.
days, they were set up. And yes, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect, and it still isn't perfect. But it happened. And yes, waiting times went up. But by and large, most contact centers were able to maintain service and
Yeah.
business continuity. And that idea of, we can do it when we need to, that agility, we can be agile when we need to. I think it's interesting. It will be interesting to see whether or not that remains
Mm-hmm.
post, as lockdown is easing, certainly in the UK. Whether things culturally go back to normal, or whether actually some of that sense of, actually, we can be quick, and we can be disruptive, and we can be innovative, whether that stays. I think there's a point I want to make though, which is also important, and you won't find a bigger advocate of remote working than me. I am the world's biggest advocate of remote working. I've been working from home for a while now, well, since well before COVID. I am
How long?
well, I would say since I've been working for myself, for sure. That was one of the reasons to work for
Yeah.
myself. But even then, even when I had a salary job, I was lucky enough to work for some quite understanding employers who allowed me to spend, reasonable amount of time at home. I would have spent more if they'd allowed me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm one of those who loves it. Not everybody does, but I am one of those who loves it, and I am one of those who, once the opportunity arises, I will be a digital nomad. There's no question
Mm-hmm.
about it. You'll probably find me somewhere in Thailand during the winter months. um,
I have a
so
cousin in Thailand.
oh,
Yeah, she
yeah,
absolutely loves it. She originally went, just as a vacation, and then found her Thailand sweetheart and fell in love there.
nice.
And they both spoke different languages. So
Yeah,
she didn't speak any of the local language. He didn't speak English. But they just had this bond, and now she's been there for probably 10, 15 years, raised a family. So really, really special thing,
what a great
special
story.
place.
What a great
Yeah,
story. What a great story. I'm not sure what the climate is like in St. Louis, but
not Thailand.
in the UK,
Yeah,
November through February isn't too good. It's not
yeah.
too good. It's not just the cold. It's just dark. It's just
Mm.
dark. So yeah, as soon as I can, I'm gonna be in Southeast Asia, and I'll be doing my job, as normal, because I can do my job. And yeah, I'll probably need to do some calls at odd hours, but hey, it's all good. So I am a huge advocate for remote working, but I also know that you can't always give complete freedom of choice to your staff. That's just not a reality.
Yeah,
And there's a number of reasons for that. For some people, the job content doesn't actually suit home. The job content requires you to deal with situations where you need to be in the office because you need access to people, you need resources. Maybe you deal with sensitive customer data, which the organization rightly doesn't want going over the public Wi-Fi. And even you might have a reasonable VPN, but it's not it's not necessarily secure enough. Um, so there needs to be a bit of give and take. The employee should absolutely be given some decision making, but the organization also needs to have some liberty to make its decisions based on what's best for the organization. There is that balance that needs to be
yeah,
struck between the needs of the individual and the needs of the organization. And there is also, I think, for many organizations, there's a truth that there is value in that community, that physical community. So if I think about some of the things that I've seen consistently over my work, and this isn't new news, if you look at any survey about attitudes to remote working, typically um, younger people have a stronger preference to be in the office, and older people typically have a stronger preference to work remotely. And
huh.
there's many reasons for that.
Actually, what are those reasons? Because
Well, there's,
that kind of strikes me as a little bit counterintuitive. I kind of understand it, but at the same time, you'd say the younger folks grew up with a digital lifestyle, and of course, they'd be the ones who they're used to one click getting everything they want. So
sure,
of course, they would be the ones who would be
yeah.
remote.
Well, there's a number of good reasons for that.
Yeah,
As an older person, you've probably grown up working in the office, and now you look forward to the alternative options and the freedoms of working at home or remotely and not having to deal with commute. You might well have child commitments where you have the flexibility if you're at home that you don't have if you need to do a commute to the office every single day. I think even more importantly, offices aren't just places to do work. Offices are places to interact, to socialize, to meet people, to talk to people. How many people meet friends, life partners in the office? If you're married and my age, then that's not really a thing for you anymore. But if you're your age, Mark, if you're in your
hmm
20s and you're still at the peak of your social powers, then actually the office is a really important place to socialize. And there's plenty of research, both within contact centers and outside of contact centers, that backs that up. I think the most important reason to call out, though, here is that actually offices are places to work, not to work, excuse me, to learn, to observe how other people work and to learn from other people. I can certainly say, and I think many people who spent a good chunk of their early careers in offices would agree, you learn so much just by being around other people. If 20 years ago when I was starting my career, I learned so much just by being around seniors and seeing how they worked and learning alongside them. It's so much harder to do that if you're not in the office. If you're trying to do
Mm-hmm.
your job at home by yourself, and yes, we've all got messaging platforms and we've all got various communication tools, it's just not the same that compared to if you're next to people and you're learning by watching them. And it's great now 20 years on. I'm pretty much settled. I'm always learning, but I've pretty much developed the skills that I need. It's one thing, and I was lucky to do that in offices. But if I'm starting out my career now, how do I learn?
The way
And
you learn changes, because when you're early on, I think that learning by watching others is one of the most valuable sources of information, which obviously is gone during the remote work environment. Um, but I think that as you advance in your career, the way that you learn is more learning by self-observation, um, and by almost making targeted plans of where you see your strengths and weaknesses,
yeah,
uh, and it's much more of an autonomous type of learning. Whereas in the beginning, it's absorb, absorb, absorb as much as you can.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a fair point. I think that's a fair point. Um, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how so many things will change, and the nature of learning and the nature of career development, the nature of progression will change.
Mm-hmm.
And if all of the seniors, because they're, as we know, older people do, generally speaking, have a stronger preference for remote working. If all the directors, all the seniors, all the leaders are now working remotely, and then they're no longer in the office, who do you learn from? And how do you learn in that new environment? As you say, is it more about self-actualization?
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting topic. So I think as always, there's no simple, easy, right answer to remote working. I think one thing that we can all be grateful for is that we now have options. Before
Mm-hmm.
we had less options, and now we have more options.
Yeah, Stephen, you highlighted pretty perfectly a pretty deep concern I have about the future of what the office will look like. We at Balto did a survey where we asked folks, great, we have the ability to go back to the office, and we're trying to choose the best office space for the company. How many times do you think you want to be in the office any given week? Um, and the most common answers were 1 to 2 times. So, how do when the whole point of being in the office is to have the like chance interactions and the
Yeah,
big group of people that you can meet, and if you go in the office, there's an 80% chance that the person that you wanted to talk to isn't there, then it's a pretty strong disincentive to be at the office if it's this like random grab bag of people that may be there and are only at 20% capacity at any given time. I think it's going to be a real challenge for making the office a productive workplace that we're going to see in the next few years.
that is so true, Mark. One of the biggest questions here in the UK within the contact center leader community is how do we continue to ensure our offices are vibrant places to work?
Mm-hmm.
They're never going to be the same again. Let's make no mistake, offices will not be the same again. And in fact, is there a risk that the office will die a slow death? Because you're absolutely right. The whole point of offices is running into people in those corridors, in the water coolers, those serendipitous moments behind, next to the coffee machine, those random conversations. That's what offices, they really do over and above just being places where people do work, because we can do any work anywhere now. But then if 80% of people aren't in the offices, you're not going to have those serendipitous moments. And if you're going to plan time with people, then you don't need to be in an office to have a planned session with somebody. You can do that over Zoom, like we're doing now.
Yep.
So I think the answer might be coming back to what I was saying earlier about the organization does perhaps need to set some boundaries, and perhaps the organization does need to say, actually, Mondays and Tuesdays, you need to be in the office.
Yeah.
Because it's really important we have people together, because it's really important that we continue to have those serendipitous conversations, because we know that that's where a lot of value is created. But you know what? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, up to you.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, you've visited contact centers all over the world, Hong Kong, China, the UK, Canada. What are a couple of the aspects of contact center culture that you've noticed in some of the places that to our US listeners might call international? What are some of the bits of international culture that you think the US might do well to apply to our contact center culture?
Oh, a great question. I should probably qualify that by saying I haven't actually spent that much time in the contact centers, specifically outside of the UK. So my contact center
Yeah.
work has been quite UK
Mm-hmm.
focused, but I do have broader experience of just doing business
Sure.
in a number of different markets. Um, I think firstly, I should say things are more similar than they are different. I think it's quite it's natural to sort of focus on differences, but
Mm-hmm.
the reality is the dynamics are probably more recognizable than they are unrecognizable. If you're a contact center person and you were to suddenly be transplanted into the equivalent in another part of the world, there's a lot of it that you would recognize. There's an awful amount that you would recognize in terms of process, in terms of culture. I think that in East Asia, typically business culture tends to be, how should I say? I think contact centers everywhere in the world are naturally quite process driven, but there is in the UK more and more scope for individuals, and I think this is a broader cultural thing as well. It's not just contact centers, it's not even just business. I think it comes down to culture. So I'll try to answer this through the lens of broader culture.
Mm-hmm.
I think the needs of the individual take a bigger priority than in places like the UK than they do in East Asia. I can't really speak for the US. I don't have so much experience over the US contact center culture. Um, I don't mean to say that's a negative thing outside of the UK either. I think it's depends on how you see things. I think that it's as a leader, it can be more challenging if you've got a lot of challenging individuals who will speak their mind and have their own preferences and expect to be listened to. That can be really challenging. Whereas in Asia, people, and I'm making huge generalizations,
Of
people just
course.
tend to obey. They tend to fall into line. They don't tend to question things quite as much, which has its pros and cons. It certainly has its pros when it comes to to managing resources. It has its pros when it comes to getting things done. It has its pros when it comes to managing change, because people tend to be more accepting of change. I think
Mm-hmm.
there is an openness to change, and there is an openness to innovation, perhaps in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, that doesn't exist to the same extent in the UK and the US. I think in Europe and North America, there tends to be a greater level of resistance to change, because people to get comfortable in the way that things are done, and they don't tend to like when new things are presented to them. Whereas in Asia, people are quite open
Mm-hmm.
to new things, whether it's new processes or new technologies or new people even.
That's so interesting because when you think of the U.S. right now is we are trying to define our national identity again, um, and it's obviously an impossible task because there's so many identities and we're so split on so many things. But the thing that at least historically seemed to bind us was of course, like, freedom, but also the concept of innovation and risk taking. So the U.S. culture, I think we think of ourselves as innovators and risk takers, but so interesting that you mentioned that in some ways, the U.S. and U.K. culture might actually be less open-minded in the business world to innovation than you might see in East Asia.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that that change and openness to new things is, or not questioning new things, is something that certainly in my experience particularly visible in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, because these are
Yeah.
places that are massively commercial. These are places that have always thrived on change and technology and innovation. And they're the lifeblood of those places. In comparison, if you look at places like the UK and the US, you have just generally culturally, politically, a greater deal of what I would call tradition, conservatism
Mm-hmm.
in the outlook. Something else that actually occurred to me, while we were talking, is just customer service in general. And here I draw a distinction between the UK. I think the UK and Europe are pretty more similar to each other, but it's definitely different to Asia. It's definitely different to the US. Um, Customer service and sort of the expectation as a customer of getting service, as well as of a professional to
Ah,
provide service, is much stronger in the US than it is in the UK, and it's much stronger in Asia than it is in the UK. So, whichever context you're in, if you're in a store or if you're on, calling a hotline, um, the general standard of service tends to be better if you're in America or in Hong Kong than it is here in the UK.
very interesting. I think makes me think of this documentary that I saw. I think it was on Netflix called American Factory. Have you seen
Oh,
that by any
I
chance?
haven't, no.
I think it's called American Factory. And basically, what it is it highlights this factory in the US, and they make, I believe, like windshields. Um, and the fact that the US is bought by a Chinese company,
Yeah.
and they are highlighting what the Chinese company is trying to understand. They're trying to respect and preserve the American culture, but also bring over best practices from the Chinese culture. And they have the American management fly to China to see how they do things. And what was so interesting about that documentary is it didn't frame it as this is the better one, this is the worst one. Like the documentary showed, like these are two just different ways of doing work, and
Mm.
both of them have pros and cons. And in order to be competitive, we're going to need to continue to learn from each
Yeah.
other. And I think that's where the world is trending too.
I think I'm going to have to check out American Factory.
It was
Yeah,
incredible.
and I am usually an advocate of cultural relativism, and I'm one of those people who don't believe in absolutes, and there's no rights or wrong, any shades of grey, and you need to look at everything in its own context. But hey, customer service in the UK is not nearly as good as it is in the US or in Hong Kong or Singapore. And for me, I think there's a correlation with just generally attitudes towards work. Americans, Hong Kong Chinese, Singaporeans, um, it's all about work. It's about the work ethic. People, yeah, and working hard to get ahead is all baked into the DNA. In the US, it's baked into absolutely baked into the DNA in Hong Kong, and it's baked into the DNA in Singapore. In the UK, it's much more. It's not so much live to work; it's work to live. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you see that playing out in customer service. Why should I go the extra mile for you? It's just a job. It doesn't even pay that much.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Um, so, Stephen, I noticed that you're the research director of three different organizations: Call Center Management Association, Insurtech Insights, and Platform 195. Um, could you tell us a little bit about your research? What's got you most excited right now?
Wow. We got another hour for the podcast, Mark.
We could.
um, so coming back to just if I can touch on sort of an earlier point about the future of work. So I'm absolutely blessed and fortunate because I've managed to find myself in a situation where I'm working for a portfolio of amazing organizations who are doing incredible work, all in areas, territories that I find personally fascinating and love to be involved in. I've always enjoyed customer experience. I've got a background in doing customer experience work at the CCMA. What I love and the whole, I'm actually relatively new to contact centers. I've never worked in a contact center. I've got more of a CX research background, voice of customer background, and it was only really in the last year or so that I've really started closely being involved. But hey, contact centers are the front line. They are the absolute, as we say in the UK, the coal face. It's when the rubber hits the road, and it's just a fascinating place to be. The stories, where from the front line is how I see my role within the CCMA. And I also think that I've got a couple of thoughts about just generally the contact center world. I think one is it deserves more airplay and it deserves more recognition. I think there is
Yes.
a public perception that contact centers are quite low end, low skilled work. And, you can understand why that is. Still, a lot of jobs, a lot of people do contact center work in between jobs. It's not a career, but that's changing. It's becoming more skilled. It's becoming more aspirational. Over time, it's going to become more more paid. It's going to be becoming more of a career. And contact center people, and my eyes have been opened so wide since coming in, working for the CCNA, talking to all kinds of people, all the way from global directors down to advisors. The caliber of people is astonishing, and the agreeableness, if I can use a term, of people, and the willingness to help, it's something that's really baked into customer facing people's DNA. Just people are so incredibly willing to help and be helpful and be agreeable. It's such a pleasure to work with people in this industry. The second point about contact center and CX work is I felt that there wasn't, or should I say, there was a gap or an opportunity to deliver more insight and better quality insight into this. Into this area. I felt that I saw a lot of stuff out there, and there's a huge amount of stuff, research. There's a lot of content marketing that leverages research. I mean, that's what I do. I do essentially content marketing that is based on research, but a lot of it is, I'm trying to pick my words carefully, perhaps not as robust as as one would ideally like. So I felt there was an opportunity to deliver some really high quality research, leveraging my research background, like actually career researcher, 20 plus years in research, and bring that to the contact center sector to really uncover what's going on and really tell those stories that are happening within the industry. So that's the CCMA piece, and I feel so fortunate to be part of that organization and get to work with the amazing people in the contact center sector. Insurtech Insights is also an incredible opportunity, and one that I'm really privileged to be a part of. They are a startup organization based out of London, but their staff is international and they've got people all over the world. They're essentially an organization. They are a community of 170,000 insurance professionals, all of whom have got an interest in innovation. I've always personally been, so I've got a lot of experience working in technology. Started my career doing B2B IT, which is actually not that interesting. Then did a lot of consumer IT. Then I did a lot of mobile telephony, mobile phones work. So I've always worked a lot in tech, and I realized that actually what interests me and excites me personally is working in areas where there's a lot of technological change. Contact centers, definitely, but also insurance. Insurance is, on one level, dull as ditch water. It's the most boring category in the world. On another level, it is genuinely one of the most interesting categories ever. It really is. If you look at the change and the disruption that's happening, and then if you strip it all down, strip it all back, insurance, as dry and technical as insurance can be, insurance is actually the most human of
It's one of the
businesses.
oldest categories in human history.
It really is.
And it's funny. I think
It's the second oldest profession.
first being Rock gathering.
I'm not going to say that on a family podcast.
Yeah.
Listeners, look that one up on Google. I'm not going to tell
Yeah.
you.
What's the oldest profession? We'll leave that one for offline. Yeah.
Insurance is the second oldest profession, but it really is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's about human frailty. It's about one's desire to protect oneself and one's family from nasty things that can happen in life. It's fascinating. The human side of insurance interests me, and yeah, I
Look
guess
back to the Old Testament, right? The Old Testament where and I'm going to get this hopefully not too wrong, where like Joseph is advising the Pharaoh to have 7 years of grain in case there's a famine. Um, like those sort of instruments, those sort of
yes,
safety measures have been implemented throughout history. And then the question became, when could you start to transact those safety measures? When could
yes,
you outsource the safety? And someone says, I will do the grain management and make sure that you are covered for your grain management. And in return, I ask for a barrel of wheat a year. And that sort of
yeah.
stuff is really how the industry came about.
So imagine an industry that's been going on since the time of the pharaohs,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the last 10 years, um, thanks to digitization, um, processes, ways of working, customer experiences that really haven't changed that much since the time of the pharaohs, have now had the opportunity to change massively. So the way that we buy insurance, the way that we consume insurance, the way that we claim on insurance is all being like completely revolutionized, through slick apps, through APIs, through relationships and partnerships between insurance carriers and non-insurance companies. Um, it's a fascinating place to be, and a really good example of the stuff that really gets me up in the morning, which is a traditional category that's been completely revolutionized with technology, and reshaping the way that it operates and
Yeah.
changing the way that customers experience the category. And Platform 195, how did that come about? That's through some, actually the founder of Platform 195 is an old friend from Hong Kong. We both came from Hong Kong to the UK about 12 years ago, and he set up his basically a creative and media agency, and I've ended up sort of developing their research arm. There's more to it as well. There's other organisations that I work with, and I think I am in some ways probably I represent, or I feel like, and I'm proud to represent to a certain extent the future of work. In that I've got 4 jobs.
What's the fourth?
So I probably need to be a little bit cagey about that, but I actually essentially I work for one of the UK's major political parties.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm essentially the research manager for one of the UK's major political parties.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot
Wow.
going on right now because in the UK we've got elections next month.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about research for a second. Here is a bold stance for you. I'd like your thoughts on it. And I don't know if where exactly I fall on it, but this is what I want to pose. Um, you're hearing rumblings in CX nowadays that the post-call survey is dead. That you can get those insights in other ways, and asking your customers to complete a survey after the call is done is no longer the best way of gathering insights from your customers or treating your customer well. Now, I don't know if that's true. It's a bold stance, but I'm curious for your thoughts.
So I think I mentioned about 5 minutes ago on the podcast that I don't believe in absolutes, and I really don't believe in absolutes. There is a very limited number of absolutes that I truly believe in. I think that
Yeah.
everybody has the right to liberty, and everybody has the right to make their own choices about important things in their life. But other than that, I don't think that anything is right or wrong. Anything is black and white. Which some people find annoying and accuse me of sitting on the fence. But the reality is, it depends. The answer to many questions is it depends. Now, if you want to get likes on LinkedIn, or on Twitter, then you
Perfect
tend to,
headline. Yeah.
it probably works really well if you put out a really controversial and quite extreme point of view, such as voice of customer surveys are dead. That will get you some attention. And that's why a lot of people say it, because they're trying to get some attention. Are voice of customer surveys dead? No, no. Do they have in the right context, used in the right way? Do they bring value to organizations? Are they bringing value to organizations all over the world today? Absolutely. Are other sources of data also valuable, and are organizations also getting value from those today? Absolutely. There's never an either or. One is right and one is wrong. And I think I struggle to distinguish between people who are saying stuff just to get the headlines and the clickbait versus people who truly believe it. I honestly think a lot of people who are saying it because they're smart, right? These people are smart. They're smart enough to know what will get their attention, and they're smart enough to not actually believe what they're saying. So no, voice of customer surveys are not dead. There are many use cases where voice of customer surveys bring value. And actually, the smartest organizations overlay multiple sources of feedback. They don't rely on surveys alone. They go to their behavioral data. If you want to understand behaviors, best thing to do is not ask people. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, bad research tends to give all research a bad name. Bad surveys, of which there are many, tend to give all surveys a bad name. A lot of people on LinkedIn and Twitter like to cite a bad survey and say, "Oh, I saw this terrible survey, therefore all surveys are rubbish." So typically, if you want to understand what's happening from a behavioral aspect, don't ask people, because people don't know. Don't ask people to record. Don't ask me how many times I ate McDonald's in the last 2 years, because I can't tell you. I used to run a survey, and I'll hand on heart, I'm not proud of it. I'd like to say it was because the client forced me to, but I'm not going to completely pass the buck. I once worked for a client who made huge business decisions based on a survey that asked people to recall their last 5 vehicle fueling occasions. So let me ask you, Mark, can you remember the last 5 times that you fueled? Do you drive?
I do.
Can you remember the last 5 times that you fueled your vehicle?
I can remember the last one.
And so please tell me, the 5 fueling occasions ago, where were you? Yeah. What did you do? How much fuel did you put in your car? What else did you do? Did you go into the shop? So can you imagine a survey that did all of that?
And I can't even tell you what state I was in.
Exactly. Can you imagine an organization that makes big decisions based on all of that? So that's not a great survey. That's not a great survey. And typically, if you're asking about if you want to know what people did, don't ask them. Go to your own data. Go to your transactional data. And of course, today, with many organizations collecting so much digital data, they're sitting on all of that behavioral data. But what behavioral data does not tell you is why people do what they do, or how they felt when they were doing it. And that's where the survey comes in. So the best organizations, the smartest organizations, use a combination of all those data streams, and they realize that there's still a role for the survey to get to the things that the behavioral data, the transactional data, the internal data doesn't give them.
Stephen, I'm going to provide a story and almost make your point for you, in some ways refute it. Because you got me thinking about last time I bought gas, and now I'm sitting here in my head thinking about the last gas station visit I was at. And I remember that I went up to the pump and I wanted to buy regular fuel, but the only option was Supreme. And I kept clicking regular. And then I thought I selected it, and I start fueling, and I noticed it's giving me Supreme gas. And I remember thinking oh, this is such crap. Like, are they doing this intentionally? Are they just trying to? And I saw my gas bill, and I was like, this is $5 or $10 more than it normally is. The reason I tell that story is, you're right. There's no way I could go back 5 stories. There's no way I can remember what happened 5 fuelings ago. But if I were talking to that gas company, I imagine that insight that I give them, which could be attained through a post-call survey, that insight would be really, really important.
Yes.
So I can see both sides of it, of how you do need the qualitative bit. You need people to tell you, you know, their perspective and narrative on questions that you have about your business.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's limits to that.
Yes. There is, however, in support of your original thesis, there is a problem. We have a problem in CX research, which is there's too much of it. And I think we all recognize this. People are over surveyed. People have survey fatigue. People are. I'd love to see a stat on this. Maybe actually I should go away and try to find and create, and do a bit of work myself to come. I'd love to know how many surveys people get invited to on an ongoing basis. It seems now you can't do anything. You can't transact with anybody without being asked for your feedback. There's one company in the UK that I won't name names, but is particularly guilty of this. Literally, you'll do one small thing like check your account balance. You'll get a, if I do that online, you'll get a survey request online. They'll then text me twice, right? They won't even give up after one go. They'll text me twice to ask me how was my interaction today. Not surprisingly, and this is the big dirty secret of the research and voice of customer business, response rates are through the floor now.
Hmm.
Response rates are not good. And the problem with that is when your response rates are low, that introduces a response bias because only a tiny proportion of people will respond to your surveys. That means your survey results are only representative of a very tiny proportion of people. There's
Hmm.
lots of people who respond to surveys. So that is a problem. And I think um, the one of the things that, again, I'm trying not to be disingenuous, Mark, because I am one of those people who has worked in the voice of customer industry and has benefited in my career by being associated with the voice of customer industry. But one
Of
of the things that
course.
we've seen over the last 20 years is the rise of voice of customer software platforms, DIY platforms. It's really easy now for an organization to do their own customer surveys. They don't even have to have any researchers. Anybody can get a piece of software and do a survey. What that means is that just there's so many
Hmm.
surveys, and it dismays me personally as a researcher to see many bad surveys done, not just bad questions, but done at inappropriate times, done without opt-in consent. Um, and we all see what's happening. We're all getting fed up with it. I'm on a Twitter feed called Bad Survey Questions. There's a whole subculture now around sharing sort of funny examples of inappropriate surveys.
Hmm.
There's a whole industry, seems to be a whole industry of people who love to bash NPS.
Hmm.
It's a whole thing now. The backlash is real.
Stephen, I think that one of the effects in research that is totally underappreciated is the concept of training your respondents, or training the market, or training your customers. And what I mean by that is, we, too often take the assumption that people are static, and that somebody who you survey today would give the same response if they felt the same way 4 years from now. But talking about like the concept of low response rates, um, we have almost learned how to take a survey. We've started to reverse engineer as people what the survey takers are trying to get at, and figured out that if you get a 0 to 10 question and you hit a 0, you're probably going to follow up question that says, well, what was bad about this? Like you kind of know as a customer that that's coming. So I think that also impacts the efficacy of a lot of the research that's happening right now. Is that the research takers are adapting to how we try to get information, and it's almost this like ongoing interplay between organizations wanting more information from their customers and customers trying to test the waters for what the right balance is for them of parting with their information.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you look at other fields, if you look at digital marketing, if you look at online marketing. The reality is that the customer, the consumer, is more sophisticated than the brand, right? And it's only a very small proportion of brands who are right, who can keep up with the customer, who today's under 35-year-old can see through sort of any sort of obvious clickbait type of campaign, or can see right through any an inauthentic campaign. That's
Mm-hmm.
why achieving authenticity in marketing is so important now, because customers are savvy and they know it. And I think you're right. I think the same is true. Same is true of surveys. And um, I'm not impartial because I'm a professional researcher. Therefore, it's in my interest to advocate for professional researchers.
Of
But
course.
I think I think DIY low cost research has brought many good things. It's made insights available and customer feedback available to organizations that perhaps previously wouldn't have had it because they wouldn't have been able to afford professional insights. So it's democratized that, and that's a good thing. But it's also, how should I say, it's created a lot of mediocre research. And I think what's happened is, as you say, customers have become wise to it. Gaming the system is a thing. Lowering response rates is a thing, and it's incumbent on people like me to stay on top of that, and stay abreast of what customers are doing, and most importantly, to respect customers,
Mm-hmm.
because I think one of the characteristics of bad research is not just that it's a leading question, or it's too long, or it doesn't appear properly on your screen. It's that it doesn't respect the customer's time. So much of voice of customer research is one way. It asks you, it demands your time, it asks you things, and it gives you nothing in return. Gives you nothing in return. And I think more and more we need to respect the customer's time. We need to give some sort of exchange of value. And that could be as simple as actually just making the research fun,
Yep.
gamifying it. So it's actually fun, and that the customer doesn't feel like it's an imposition of their time to do. So much of research is designed on the terms of the researcher, and it's not designed on the customer's terms. So that's what the leading edge of research is now. It's actually making research not feel like research.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Almost like the naturalistic observation that
Yes.
if you kind of think back to the 70s, where you have a bunch of young folks in a room all drinking Coke, and just tell me, what is the experience like?
Yes.
Maybe we are due for a revival of that sort of research.
Oh, it's absolutely happening, and the best researchers, the best organizations are really pushing those frontiers. But the vast majority of what we all see as customers isn't that.
Right.
And I think that's been one of the side effects of the democratization and the mainstreaming of customer surveys, unfortunately, because it's, anybody can do a customer survey now. It doesn't take much.
One of the I'll tell a quick story, and then we got like the question that I always ask to round us out. A friend of mine was taking a survey the other day, and he was saying that as he completed the survey, it got longer. So as he was completing the survey, they were adding questions onto the survey.
Oh my gosh, it's like Hotel California, right? You can never leave.
Yeah.
Never leave. Yeah, yeah. I think. I mean, I recognise that I'm guilty of it. You design these surveys, and your friend was probably quite interesting, right? He probably had some interesting characteristics. So he ticked that box. Therefore, we needed to
Yep.
probe that because he was one of the few people who ticked that box. So hey, let's ask him a few more questions.
Yeah.
Yes, that's hilarious. That's so fun. But yes, I'm guilty of that. I'm afraid I've written questionnaires like that.
Stephen, what is your picture in your mind of what the contact center and the CX world of 2030 will look like?
Ah. Well, I'm not going to say it's going to be 2030, but I'll try to paint a picture of a future which is not too far away. Whether it's 2030 or 2035, I couldn't say. I think that organizations will be far more responsive to the customer than they are today. by responsive, I mean offering the customer's choice of interaction channel. So that's already a thing, omni-channel. Everybody talks about omni-channel, but that will become much more of a reality in the future. I think we're starting to see it become a reality today, but it's only in a very small minority of situations and with organizations where you have a really truly omni-channel experience where actually I can, and by that I don't just mean the channel that I choose, but I can actually switch channels. I can hop channels. I can pick up the phone, have a conversation, and then I can go onto the web chat, and everything that I've talked about on that phone conversation is there in the web chat, and then I can go back to the chatbot, and the chatbot knows exactly what's happened in every conversation before that, and it's all done in a very automated and very seamless way, on the customer's terms. So, and I think responsiveness is also about predictiveness. So analytics will increasingly predict what I want before I don't have to tell you what I want. You'll know what I want based on the analytics, because you'll have all this data about not just from me, but people like me. You'll know exactly what I want. You'll know how I like to be talked to, through which channel, using what language, through which tonality. You'll know if I'm one of those people who just likes to talk. It might not seem like it because I've just spoken to you for an hour, Mark, but I'm actually quite a sort of I'm not a talker. And particularly when I'm in customer service situations, don't ask me how my day has been. Just get to the point. Give me what I need. Don't have the shorter and the more succinct and to the point the conversation, the better. That's me. Now, you, Mark, might actually love to, you might, oh God, the game yesterday, man,
I'm a handle time
the
culprit.
Cardinals, what are they playing at, right? You might like to have that bit of banter at the start of your call. And therefore, whether it's a bot or whether it's a human on the other side will give you that. They'll have that conversation with you. Whereas Stephen calls, don't talk about the Cardinals. Stephen just wants to get to the point. And further to that, we're starting to see that, of course, now with organizations like Amazon. You'll know what I want to buy. You'll know why I'm calling. You'll know what I'm expecting even before, I don't have to tell you. You'll know what I'm expecting. So I think that we're only starting to really understand the power of predictive analytics. We're only starting to see the power of what data can bring to the experience, both in contact centers and the wider customer experience. I think there will be, coming back to the contact center, there'll be the contact center careers will feel much more aspirational than they are now. It's true, right? Not just in the UK, but in the US, everywhere in the world. No one grows up thinking, I want to work in a contact center. You tell people you're working in a contact center, and people are like, okay, when are you going to get a real job, right? It doesn't feel like a real career, but it will, because the fact is that the skills you need to work in a contact center are genuine, proper skills. You need to know the organization. You need to know about its products. You need to know about its services. You need to know who to talk to, to answer the customer's question. You need to think on your feet. You need to be good with people. You need to have great communication skills. You need to have soft skills, hard skills, people skills, product skills. That proper skills, right? And skills that actually will set you up in other jobs, for other careers, later on. I think we'll start to see contact centers becoming more desirable as places to work, and people will take them more seriously as careers. And I think we'll start to see, and we are already starting to see, and this comes back full circle to a point you made at the beginning of the discussion, Mark. I think contact centers aren't just sort of a function that sits there on the side. It's kind of downstream operations. It's front and center. The contact center is in many ways the nerve center of every organization. The contact center is where the front line happens. It's where it's the primary interface between an organization and its customers and its stakeholders. It's more and more defines the experience that the customer has of an organization more than any other touch point, I would say. And think about all that data that you're collecting. As organizations start to wake up to and understand the power and the value of data, I think contact centers will become elevated, because nowhere else do you get so much data than you do in the contact center.
Stephen, this was fun. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining me.
you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. The fun was all mine.
Next time, talk to you soon, my friend.
And you. Take care now.
See ya.
Bye-bye.